Good morning and welcome to Local at 11. My name is Kay Joyner and I am your host. We're joined today by Ruth Backstrom. Ruth has a doctorate in education and she is currently serving as the director of a small nonprofit in Durham working on progressive issues called Generator Solutions Network. But Ruth is here today to talk with us about the transition movement. She volunteers her time with Transition Durham, where she educates the public on really important issues such as the end of cheap oil and also in how to develop community resilience. Ruth, welcome. We are delighted to have you here today.
Thank you.
Now, many of our audience members may be somewhat unfamiliar about transition movement. So, could you please just start and tell us a little bit about the movement, maybe the history, how it got started, where it got started?
Yeah, sure. It started in Totnes, England. A guy named Rob Hopkins got the idea that he wanted to create what he called an energy descent plan. And it was a look at how communities could become more independent of fossil fuels. So he created this energy descent plan. His background is in permaculture, and permaculture is the study of how to design agricultural systems and other design systems to reflect the same principles as nature. So one of the things in permaculture is to take like a small area of land, like a quarter acre of land, and actually be able to feed a whole household on it. And then he took this plan to Totnes, England, and they actually endorsed it, began to act on it. And so it started in 2005, and it's just sort of taken off like wildfire all across the world. There are now 400 transition towns that are using this approach. Across the world.
Oh, great.
100 of them are in the United States.
Wonderful. So, how does this initiative differ from other initiatives? How does the transition movement differ?
Well, it has a particular lens, which is, it's like a community lens. It's really trying to restore a sense of community. So it's working with groups of nonprofits, actually, bringing together groups of nonprofits. And it also is more, it uses a methodology called open space, which means people get together without a preconceived agenda, and then they can start and initiate various efforts on their own. So it kind of takes it out of the sort of staid, nonprofit approach, which we could call kind of the spider model, where you have one person at the head and you have these different little people working underneath this one person, to what you could think of as a starfish model. And we see this, for instance, in the Occupy movement too, where you have like little clusters everywhere and they're each independent. And the idea is you could have groups working somewhat independently, but then also linked together with this community lens focus.
And that's very interesting. How do you link with other groups?
Well, we try and bring them together, and our particular focus is looking at the end of peak oil or cheap oil. We've now reached a point where the oil that we need to get is becoming increasingly expensive and harder to get at. For instance, the tar sands oil, you have to go all the way under the sands to get it. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be cheap, not very effective. So that's one issue. And the other issue that we really like to bring into focus is community resilience. How can communities become more resilient in the face of these challenges of more expensive oil, less economic certainty, and also these oncoming climate disaster issues coming down the pike?
I know that fracking is a big issue now. Is that something that you talk about with transition movement?
We try and find, we're trying to find alternative energy that's the most positive, but on the other hand, we're trying to find common ground. So we don't really want to go into the issues that are as controversial as fracking. So we're really looking for what can bring communities together, where can we find common ground. And fracking right now is a really controversial issue, although individually we may have different opinions and we may work pro or against it.
Right. What are some of the organizations that you do work with?
Well, we've been working with a lot of the food groups. The first year, we actually started in 2011. The first year we worked with food. We looked at how can households change, how can communities change, and how can urban gardens be created in communities. And we showed films to about 200 people in Durham.
Okay, now so you're talking about Transition Durham.
Durham, I'm sorry.
Okay, so let's,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I might have moved you off of that. Let's move from transition movement in general, which is a global issue, to more specifically about Transition Durham. Can you tell us how that got started? When you said it started in 2011, how it got started and a little bit more specific about the details of Transition Durham.
Yes, sure. So Transition Durham got started sort of after Transition Carrboro got started. My husband and I and a number of other people went to what's called their Great Unleashing. And at the Great Unleashing, what happens is you bring all these groups together and they form different action groups, spin-off. And it was a huge event. There were like 300 people in the room, and it was just a vibrant, exciting moment because everybody was sitting there envisioning what the future they wanted might look like and how they could create it. And people got up and created groups to sit together and imagine that future and see what steps they could take. And so that inspired us. We watched that and thought, we really want to do this in Durham. But we realized that one of the issues with transition is it's just so broad, so we decided to narrow it down and start with a focus on food. And so a group of us, about 7 of us, got together and started this film series. And then we had these, like I said, we had these films over the course of a year, and we focused on the different levels, the individual, the community, the urban gardens, like that.
Actually, that's how I came to know about Transition Durham. I attended a couple, maybe 3, I think, of the films I was able to because of my schedule. And they were very interesting and very informative. Will you be doing those again?
I think now what we're looking at is networking with other organizations and looking at some other issues. You know, one of the big issues is energy, though we'll continue to look at food. And it turns out that the mayor of Durham had a conversation with one of the gentlemen in the films, actually, and is really inspired about urban gardens. So I think we're going to work with the mayor to really ramp that up. So that's going to continue. And then we've got an economics group that's working on, that's just a study group right now, looking at alternative economics. Because one of the things that they did in Totnes is they created a Totnes pound. So they created an alternate currency, actually.
A Totnes pound?
Pound.
A currency?
A currency, yes.
How interesting.
And
is that something you're
well,
thinking
we're looking at it. We're still on the study stages. And we're not sure it's as effective as Move Your Money, which is a movement to actually take money out of the big banks and put them into your local credit unions and stuff. So that's one thing we're looking at, and we're going to continue the food efforts, like I said, and then energy. In my nonprofit, we've been collecting success stories of communities doing energy projects, and we're going to look at some of those, I think, in the energy group.
And speaking of success, how successful has the movement been? The global movement, maybe talk about the success of that first, and then tell us a little bit more about Transition Durham's success so far.
Yeah, sure. It's been really successful in terms of spreading. It's a really popular idea. Like there's 2 stages actually. There's official transitions and mullers. Mullers are still sort of getting their group together. And there's like 400 of them and then 400 official ones. So it's really about, 800 across the world in a very short period of time. And there are a lot of exciting ideas that are coming out of it. But I actually think one of the most exciting things out of it is not just the ideas, but the sense of recreating community and kind of putting the social fabric of community back. I mean, in a way, the problem with nonprofits is they become so siloed that there's not as much conversation between them. And so this is an attempt to say, okay, let's start talking as a community and visioning together again.
I love that idea. How do you feel like that it's going so far?
Well, I think it's good. I mean, it's a little hard because it's a new idea. And so, everybody's still, I mean, there are turf wars that you get caught in and stuff like that. So it's a little tricky, but I think it's going well. I think it's very exciting. People, we have a steady group of people who are interested in doing it, and they have connections with people in the community. So I think it's going to, be very good.
In Transition Durham, you said that you started out with 5 or 6, 7 people, I think. How many are part of this organization now?
Oh, well, we have about 15 or so.
Okay.
We have a mailing list of 200,
Ah.
then we have about a core of 15. And we'd like to spin off and create groups at some point, but we're still trying to do the awareness raising. There are kind of stages in Transition Durham, and the first stage is awareness raising, the second stage is networking, and then the third stage is this sort of great unleashing where you create these committees that actually do various projects. And so it's sort of project-based, so you have a bunch of different projects going on in the community. A lot of reskilling. We've been working with an organization called Recycling, which does a lot of reskilling workshops where they teach you old skills that have been lost that you'll need to have, basically, as we use less fossil fuels.
So now I'm familiar a little bit with Recycling, it's out of Durham, right?
Right.
Can you name what some of the skills are that we would need as we move on at the end of cheap oil?
Well, we need to be able to grow food. That's something that we're all going to need because the price of food correlates with the price of gasoline. And so, I mean, a lot of these riots that you've seen in the East are due to the rise of food, and that's coming down the pike to us too. So we need to be growing food locally.
Okay. And so we're just about out of time. Can you just tell us briefly what you see for the future of Transition Durham?
Yeah, I think the future that we see is having at least 3 core groups kind of working on these and networking together with other organizations.
And what groups?
And those 3 core groups are energy, economics, and food.
Awesome. Ruth, thank you so much for being here. It's such an important issue. I really appreciate your being here, sharing it with all our audience members. Audience, I really appreciate that you tuned in today. I hope that you will come back and join us again and let us know about the progress of Transition Durham. I hope that you will all join us next week. We have a very big surprise. You don't want to miss it. Thank you.